From Software is heading back to its mecha roots with Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. It's fast, frenetic, poorly balanced, and kinda dull. For a title like this to come out from one of my favorite companies is kinda shocking. I'm fine that this game has little to no Dark Souls DNA in it. The gameplay can be a lot of fun occasionally. So let's just break down the highs and the many lows of this occasionally fun and often maddeningly frustrating title in the XboxEra review of Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. I have dabbled in previous Armored Core games, always finding their control schemes to be a bit too off-putting. The latest in the series fixes those control issues and takes us to the stars as we head to the planet Rubicon 3. A never-ending fight over the substance coral finds your mercenary pilot caught up in the middle of a lot of baffling and very dull political squabbling. Every mission begins with a long voiceover cutscene featuring minimal on-screen movement. After this ends, you'll normally go into yet another shorter cutscene, and finally, head out to your mission. Load times are incredibly fast, taking only a few seconds to go in and out of a mission on Series X. The story itself starts out as a mishmash of I have no idea who I am, what I'm doing, or where I'm going, and evolves into I don't really care about any of this, I think I might just start skipping it all. The writing is poor, the voice acting is a mix of passable and terrible, and the overall plot makes kinda no sense. There is no real world building, as everything is either a text menu or you're in-game and shooting things while people are talking. The Souls titles do have incredibly deep lore that you can discover both in-world and through the descriptions of drops, but at no point did I feel attached to any part of this story, and the weird tough guy American Army accents in certain missions were very painful. The mission design is mostly linear. You'll choose a sortie from the menu and listen to a mediocre cutscene dialogue. Then once you're happy with your loadout, and more on that later, you'll quickly load into a small map full of Xbox One era textures. You're a big old mecha, so buildings, helicopters, and normal tanks all look tiny to you. The scale is the best part of the game, even if most of the maps don't feature that large of a playable area. Early missions can be a few minutes long, with later ones being upwards of 20 or more. The game is generous early on with its checkpointing system, replenishing all of your ammo and heals whenever you die. My main issue, though, are the difficulty spikes. I'm only allowed to show in this video and mostly talk about the first 2 chapters, and each of the end bosses in those chapters is terrible. They are cool in their mechanical design, but the jump in difficulty is kinda miserable, because if you do not know their exact weakness, it can take a very long time to defeat them. I was able to breeze through most of the title, especially early on, but every now and then a new fight popped up that whooped my ass repeatedly, but without that proper ramp-up. The counter for the Chapter 1 boss was easy enough to figure out, but even after quickly finding the proper setup for the Chapter 2 boss, it still took me many dozens, if not over 100 attempts to defeat him. I had to go back and repeatedly farm the older missions to earn in-game money to buy the absolute best setup possible. Even with all that, it took me nearly 15 minutes of playing damn near perfectly to finally defeat him. It has been a pretty negative piece so far, but it's not all bad. The gameplay in Armored Core 6 is mechanically great. When the levels felt well balanced, it was an absolute blast to play. Your shoulder and trigger buttons are each assigned to a different weapon. A is your jump, and your hover button in midair. B puts you into boost mode, while X is your dash, and Y interacts with doors and switches. Up on the D-pad is your heal, of which you have 3 base charges. You can get unlocks later that use the rest of the D-pad, and overall, it feels great. To fly for short distances, you'll push in the left stick, and boy did I accidentally press that a lot. It led to some frustrating deaths, though I'm honestly not really sure where else they could have put it on the controller. The gameplay itself is extremely fast, whether you're the base all-around setup, the jumpy boy, the floaty man, or the tank guy. They're all quick and feel different enough that you will need to get good at each, as certain bosses are built around their unique setups. Ammo is a concern on longer missions and longer boss fights. Occasionally you'll come across a supply Sherpa. Hitting Y next to these initiates a short cutscene and you get all your stuff replenished. The only other way to go into a big fight with full ammo and heals is to die and reload at the latest checkpoint. As you progress through the main campaign, you'll unlock various part and upgrade systems. The parts store gives you access to a laundry list of parts you can upgrade, being the right hand, right shoulder, head arms, core, legs, booster, generator, and expansion slot, to name a few. This is where the game is at its most mecha nerdy, and I loved it. Every piece has its own weight, energy needs, and a ton of stats. You can get increased AP, which is your health, increased damage output, various damage resistances, and more to create a delicate balancing act that requires you to experiment if you want to succeed. You may be tempted to sell parts to buy new ones often, but I would warn against that, because if you die mid-mission, you can choose either to respawn right away or go to your assembly screen and change your loadout. You cannot, however, go to the parts store, which is only available in between missions. So if you're selling everything and keeping a god loadout, you will not leave yourself many options when a boss fight comes around that demands you use the hover legs instead of maybe the high jump ones. The OS system utilizes chips you can earn in the arena mode. That arena mode has you facing various AI opponents in 1v1 battles. It's not too hard most of the time, and the OST chips you can get from it massively boost the power of your mecha. The loadout you choose can be changed for free at any time, again in between missions. It's not the deepest system in the game, but it is one more carrot to chase to make yourself feel more customized and powerful over time. As the game went on, my issues with the cheapness greatly increased. Where checkpoints had been extremely generous, I would find myself 10 minutes into a very tough level, die, and then be told my only option was to completely restart it. It didn't happen on every level, but when it did, it greatly dampened my enjoyment. Armored Core 6 isn't an ugly game, nor is it a stunner. What is most surprising is that it runs buttery smooth while targeting 60 FPS in performance mode. There is a 30 FPS targeted ray tracing mode as well, but I didn't feel like the eye candy was worth it to the hit in input latency. I'm sure Digital Foundry or others will find frame drops here and there, but on the whole, it runs significantly better than anything else I've played by From lately. The levels aren't huge, despite the occasionally gorgeous vistas trying to trick you into thinking they are. A few early and many later levels have incredible scope to them, though, despite the playable areas still being rather small. And while buildings and smaller enemies look kinda basic and occasionally pretty terrible, the enemy mecha and distant parts of the environment can be stunning, thanks to some brilliant art design. But it really is all let down by ugly environment textures when you're close to most of the actual world of Rubicon 3 itself. You'll be flying around like a maniac often enough that it isn't a big issue. But the game has a photo mode, and often when I went to take a cool picture, I found myself shocked at just how bad the ground and wall textures could look around my kick-ass looking mecha. As stated previously, the writing and voice acting are mostly very bad. Your character never really speaks, so you'll be listening to Handler Walter and others a lot, and thankfully, Walter's voice work is solid. It's most of the others who are a mix of generic to outright terrible. And as I came to talk about the music, I kind of realized that I barely remember it. It fits the mood of the fights pretty well, but it's not memorable at all, which is kind of a first for me with From. Thankfully, polish-wise, I only ran into one error, which was one crash. That was it. I had no other major bugs with mission objectives or enemies, though their AI can be pretty dense and just continuously run into a building in the middle of nowhere for a while. And I did try to play some of the 6v6 PvP mode, as the company had whitelisted us for the review process, but I've been unable to find a game, unfortunately. Wrapping things up, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon is an odd return to what has mostly been a kinda mediocre series. It fixes multiple issues, mainly control-wise, from the past titles, without adding much else. It's not great to look at, and while it can be fun to play, its poor balance as you progress kills any joy to be found after not too long.